Boom. Yep.
You've been working on that one a couple times.
All right.
No, we've said. I think I haven't.
I
Said
know
that
you've said
one.
it multiple times. I know.
I think it's been at least like a week, maybe 2, since I've said that crap.
All right, ready?
All right, let me tell
You gonna hit
everyone
it?
on the internet. All right,
Are we tweeted yet?
working on it.
Oh, whoops. I'll fix that. A little bit of a reverb, at least in my end.
All right. Well, everybody, welcome to Black Hills Information Security, talking about news, which once again, it's another episode without ransomware. If you want to know about ransomware, we've got a webcast dedicated to ransomware. Don't click on links from strangers, have file backups, good EDR. We don't need to talk about that here anymore. So, Ryan, what's our first news story for today?
Well,
what do you got for us?
We've got something in North Korea.
All right. So,
I like the best.
So for the co-hosts, we got Banjo Crashland, we've got Derek, we've got Ralph and Ryan. Apparently, North Korea hacked in and stole the Pfizer vaccine. At least that's what South Korean security forces are saying. If anybody's kind of a little bit dark about this, North Korea has had a pretty active hacking group for quite some time. And their goals and objectives could be something as simple as trying to stop Sony from releasing a movie. What was the name of that movie? Was it called The Dictator? Was that it?
Yeah, that was it. It was The Dictator, yeah.
And it wasn't even that good of a movie. It was okay, but they wanted to shut it down.
It got way more publicity due to that hack. Like, people watched it. It was like an act of patriotism to watch that movie at that point.
So does it say something about me that I never saw the movie, but I certainly took a look at the malware?
Yeah. It shows you're in the right place, Derek. You've got a home here. But they've also been very heavily involved in crypto mining. So they break into sites and then they basically do cryptocurrency mining. And there's all kinds of various news stories talking about exactly how much crypto mining they do. But in this case, they actually broke in and they stole the Pfizer vaccine. At least once again, that's what South Korea is actually saying. And I don't know, honestly, if this is something that should be a surprise. The one thing that I think is interesting about it isn't like, if you get the vaccine from Pfizer for COVID-19, it's not like baking a cake. It's not like you get this recipe and it's like, okay, turn the oven to 350, mix, 1 part flour and then, 14 ounces of amino acids with RNA or mRNA from this. It's not that simple, right? But it does bring up a bunch of very, very interesting questions about the overall security related to corporate level security. Because you would think that Pfizer has a cracking good security team. And you would think that Pfizer would be protecting the COVID-19 virus immunization stuff. Like, you would think they would have really, really good security. And the fact that North Korea probably got in is a bit concerning to me. And the question that I want to open up to everybody is, do you think that we kind of oversell what we think security is at certain organizations more so than what's the actuality of the level of security support structure these companies have?
I feel like we should maybe rename the security team to the Hurdle and Slow Down Molasses team, maybe. Or it's like our job here is to try to keep people from getting to the goal, but it happens every once in a while, but we're pretty good most of the time.
Yeah, we stop at 99% of that time, but that 1%, it's like the back of the condom. It's just giving you the warning, and the percentages, those matter.
That's a really good point, because a vaccine, like if it's 90% effective, people are like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, so first, this isn't surprising for anyone, right, that they would try and break in and steal it. And I think it's sort of like what we were talking about last week, where like I don't know the details. I would assume that is like, big time company intellectual property and would be protected. But I mean, I've tested folks, or organizations in the healthcare industry, and I've never been terribly impressed. So like it's probably one of those things again where like they probably do have a good security team that goes to great lengths and tries to get things implemented, and then doesn't happen. But I also don't know like the details of like how they got in, like how did they get in. But I bet it's the most sophisticated hack ever.
It definitely is.
Probably. If you talk to Pfizer, it was 0 days, and it was just absolute leaked top shelf stuff. It totally wasn't a spearfish and somebody clicked the link or downloaded an Excel spreadsheet with macros. Not that at all. Like, even though that's 95% of the time.
The other thing too is, I've done tests for really decent organizations. Like they had decent response, they had decent security teams, and you get caught one way and another way works, right? And I feel like in these engagements, if you go long enough, you can learn enough about what they are good at and what they aren't to really find your way through this environment, right? And some of those things seem so trivial, and you're like, why do they have this big blind spot? And that's what we get paid for, to hopefully find these things for them. But if you just keep going back and over again, repeating this process, and these attackers have plenty of time, and they can go back and see that something didn't work or something that does work, and build it together, where eventually they have a full attack chain that just is kind of flawless, right? And that can happen, right? That's that advanced attacker.
And then somebody gets into a data center and embeds a Raspberry Pi with an LTE back channel, and you weren't expecting that, right? I mean, I've definitely been on engagements where, like, I was on a red team once where the company was heavily instrumented for spearphishing. Spearphishing did not work, right? But they had never heard of password spraying, so go figure.
Well, that also gets into the focus. I mean, if you were trying to, like, just for example, if you were going to try and do your security architecture and you based it exclusively based on the news, and I'm pulling news stories, right? A lot of this news show is kind of ambulance chasing, and it's kind of chorus level, but we're going through, we look at the news stories. If you were a CISO and you were looking at news stories, you would think the most important thing right now would be whatever exploit du jour is out there today, right? You would be talking to your security team about the Silver Sparrow malware, which we're going to talk about here on Mac in just a little bit. You'd be talking about these things that are showing up in the news, but if you go and you look at the top news sources on the internet, they're not talking about spearphishing very much at all. They're not talking about password spraying much at all. That's not interesting news. So you're right. It kind of creates these blinders to where people just kind of focus what's actually showing up in the news. And then it gets reinforced whenever you go to conferences, because conference planners are trying to pick topics. And I deal with this all the time. They're like, John, could you please give us a talk on, let me just find something here real quick. Could you give us a talk on, security and blockchain? Yes. Or they would say, well, we'd really like to have a talk on Fin11 and ransomware. And you ask, well, why? And they're like, well, it's currently, the number one news story on ThreatPost. But it's absolutely detached from the reality and kind of the base level of security that's required to protect organizations as well. And wading through logs just said, you need to have something with sexy names. That's what actually gets them to be interested.
Well, I would say that if you're a CIO and you're listening to this and you're managing your security team by In-Flight magazine, you're doing it wrong. You need to listen to what your security folks are saying. And if they're saying, hey, we really need to change our password policy from an 8-character minimum and put 2-factor everywhere, and you're like, well, it didn't say that.
It didn't say that. It didn't say that in that Hemisphere's 2-page article about computer security on my United flight.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. So, and I'm being tongue in cheek about it, but I'm also being serious. Is that I think before I was at Black Hills, it always amazed me. Well, actually, probably still amazes me, the consultant effect, right? Like you would say as an employee of a company, like we need to do X, Y, Z. And then, they're like, yeah, whatever. And then you hire, a consultant for $40,000 to come in and say the same thing. And they're like, why didn't you ever say that to us? What the heck?
Meanwhile, there's a security person on their team that's like banging his head against the desk at the, it's like, I've been telling him that for years. So but that happens all the time. And I don't know if that's necessarily a factor of the hype cycle in security news. Like once again, it's boring stories. It's like, hey, patch your crap. It's not a really sexy kind of story.
Probably news in general, right? Like all news now is a headline to get you to click so that you can get ads targeted at you so people can make money, right? I mean, that's what it all is. I don't think it's any different because of like whatever the topic of the news is. That's a completely different subject.
Why are you telling people about the stuff I do all day?
Yeah, sorry, man.
Exactly.
I didn't say it was wrong. I just said that's what's happening.
So, all right. So that kind of brings us, I think, when we're talking about sexy titles of stories and gets people all excited, our next news story is the Silver Sparrow malware. So this particular story is interesting because it's one of the first pieces of malware for Mac that's been specifically compiled to run on M1 architectures utilizing JavaScript for a number of different things, which is kind of interesting in the OS X world. Its command and control is actually using CDN. So it's basically pulling down the command and control from Amazon S3 bucket and also an Akamai link as well, which is interesting because we always talk about, domain fronting and those types of attacks. We always talk about domain fronting as something that pen testers do that we don't see actual adversaries use very often. We just don't. And domain fronting is something that they've been pronouncing it dead for the past 3 years. It's like, well, Google's not going to allow it anymore, and it still works. And Amazon shutting it down, and it still works like constantly.
Well, so AWS, I actually don't know about Google. I've never used those, but certainly Amazon did technically kill domain fronting. What they didn't kill was the ability to use a CloudFront distribution to essentially be a relay, right? So you still have like a CloudFront link instead of pretending to be, another domain like, Newsweek or something, right? And that just because they're hosted at AWS and you had a host header in there where you could, essentially point it at Newsweek, but then it would get routed to your backend server. So they did change that. They didn't change the other, and then Azure, unless something has recently changed, still allows you to domain front as far as I know.
You can domain front on Azure. You can't domain front on CloudFront. I mean, obviously, just using a CDN is just great for an attacker. Okay, so nobody's going to blacklist Amazon's S3 bucket or whatever. And in fact, this actually we're sending data through S3 buckets, right? So this is a little bit different than using a CDN, but the same idea, right? So just using some kind of known service that would be difficult or not, it would be difficult or near impossible to actually, blacklist, right? So to put that black on, and that's really what you're trying to do with any of those things, is just blend in a little bit more and make it so that you can't just block the domain name because you bought my company's, doppelganger.com. So.
Yeah, I mean, I almost exclusively run C2 through CDN.
Yeah, if you're not, CDN is, if you're exposing that IP, you've given everything away. So.
Yeah, but this malware is one of the most fascinating things that pieces of malware that I've read about in a while. The M1 thing is crazy because there are legit software platforms that haven't migrated yet.
Yeah, I mean, so I wanted to make one statement about this, though. Okay, so I have an M1. There's tons of programs that actually already have been recompiled into ARM. Recompiling to ARM is not incredibly difficult, depending on the architecture that you wrote it in, right? So it's not like, a lot of these programming languages already have a flag that you can just kick it and just be like, all right, I want ARM 64-bit. That works, right? And so that's all they're having to do. So it's not the end of the world to compile to ARM, and a lot of developers are doing it. What is interesting, though, is that they're targeting a small amount of people, because I don't think everyone's got an M1 laptop now.
They're future-proofing,
right? So they had, well, no, it wasn't just for the M1 from what I read. Like, there were essentially two packages, right? But the thing to me that I still can't wrap my head around, and I was actually talking to this about some of the folks in my master's cohort, because anytime anything security comes up, they're like, hey, what do you know about this, right? And so the distribution mechanism, where, from what I understand, is essentially people searching and looking for software packages and getting the wrong thing. Which, that's not surprising,
but
in itself.
30,000 infections so far that way?
But I still can't, and Troy and I were talking about this today out on a run. Like, I don't know, like, why would you choose that? Like, what is your end result? And the best thing we could come up with was proof of concept. Like, I just don't really, you take that, and then from what I can tell, when it runs, it just like says hello world, and I guess the other one did something like you did it or something.
Well, right now it's basically Seinfeld malware. It's malware that does nothing, right? It just sits and it's waiting for more command. It just kind of sits there. And that was another thing I wanted to talk about this article, is a lot of security researchers are just completely floored by that. They're like, so it's just literally and they don't call it a stager, but that's what we call it. So in the industry, a dropper, right?
Yeah.
So we'll use stagers, which actually get you access to a system, and then a stage is where you actually load your malware, and that's really common in pen testing and in offensive computing. That's how we do things, because a stager can be really small, right? And then you can load what you need and only what you need. But it's interesting because the researchers are like, we don't know what the hell this thing does. It just sits there, and they're like, what do you think it does? Like, I don't know, adware, and that's kind of where they're.
All right, I think I have an idea. We've talked about this before, where project management on criminal syndicates. This feels like one of those, like, all right, so and so, you want to do this thing? Put a proof of concept together. Let's see how long it takes.
We'll
Let's see how
test
many
it.
people. Yeah. And then we're like, all right, now we see what we need to revamp and what needs to.
But it's like
happen.
ASOC the intern creates Silver Sparrow and puts it out there, and now. So,
But I mean,
and now
that's
there's going to be some hacker that's going to be pissed at me and contact me later and be like, "I'm not an intern." It's like I was just picking an intern. I didn't say you were an intern. Chill. So.
Yeah, but I mean, you got to think though that once you start distributing, as some software that people download, like you're gonna get busted at some point, right? Like, I mean, just from the number of eventually someone's gonna notice something, you're gonna get busted. So, like, yeah, this is a weird one. It's fascinating.
I think it's fascinating that it spread so fast. Like, they were able to get people to download this DMG or PKG package, and what did it say it was going to do for you, right? Like, that's my question. Like, what, because whenever I get a DMG, I'm like, you better install this thing. Like, I want to do that.
They probably said it sped up video downloads or something.
I'm guessing there's an M1 Discord server, and someone went in there and said, "Hey, this is a new thing that you definitely want." And everyone's like, "I got it."
Your media player needs an update.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Update your
right.
flash.
I think they did actually talk about some updates and things like that as well. So, but the other thing about this story that I think is humorous is, what is it? What do they call the trusted platform module on the M1 chip? It's like a T2 chip or something weird.
Yeah,
like
it's the
that,
T2 chip. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the TPM. And it's funny how many, this gets back into what we were just talking about. There's security people out there. They're like, but this has a security chip. How is malware getting on this if it has a security chip? It's like, do you know what that chip actually does? I mean, you know that if somebody can actually get on that system and start running PS list and it's different than a rootkit, right? And and it gets into like the years where I was working with SANS and teaching with SANS. We had an entire section on rootkits. And we talked about kernel level and user mode rootkits and all these different levels of which a rootkit can run. And there were people that would come up to me and they're like, dude, why are we talking about this stuff? Like, rootkits use all these techniques in conjunction. Why are we trying to break them up into groups? And one of the things I always said is, we have to understand. And I think that this shows when people are talking about this malware, they think that there's this magical chip that's going to stop the malware. But if you don't understand the difference between application level backdoors and kernel level backdoors, it kind of loses a lot of meaning very quickly as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, that chip does a lot of things, right?
It does, right?
Yeah, it does, and it does a lot of things related to security, right? But
I feel bad for the engineers. They're like, what we're doing is we're verifying the integrity, we're verifying signatures, we're doing all of this stuff within the CPU itself. It's coordinating with the operating system because the operating system and the chip are they're just simpatico and all this stuff, and it's like, but what if somebody downloads an application DMG and just runs it and gives it root access? And you can just see an engineer's head explode.
No one will ever do that.
Why would they do that?
Sounds like you have another problem. Okay, I can't fix it.
All right. So that's the story of Sparrow. The last one I think is probably the most interesting for today. I love this. Okay, so anything dealing with the equation group, or dealing with tailored access operations with the NSA and shadow brokers is just like, this excites me. I like talking about this stuff. And so the overall point on this is it appears the Chinese were actually using some of the same techniques that the NSA was using, and has been using those techniques for much longer than we thought that they were using those techniques. And it gets into questions of, did the Chinese actually just steal this from the NSA, i.e. shadow brokers style theft? Did the Chinese develop it on their own? Because if you have a vulnerability it's very, very common for two people to come to the exact same conclusion once they start looking at that vulnerability, even though I don't think that's what's actually happening here. But what is actually going on with the Chinese gaining access to these types of vulnerabilities that the NSA was actually running? Now, the other reason why I wanted to talk about this story that I thought was really, really, really interesting is it deals with event log manipulation. So you have like dander spritz, and basically what they can do is they can actually pause the event logging service on a Windows computer system, reach in and then selectively delete specific event logs and then restart the event logging service. Is huge. It's one of those things that we've been talking about for years, because a lot of computer forensics investigations, the logs are the truth. And what happens if there's actually a way of actually modifying event logs? Now, all that being an interesting conversation, it's completely moot because most attackers don't give a rip about event logs, because most detections don't come from event logs. Something like 1.5% or less of the infections are detected and attacks are detected through event log analysis. And I'm not talking about EDR event logs. I'm talking about event logs coming off of the endpoint, and sysmon notwithstanding. So it's interesting. The Chinese were actually utilizing these types of techniques, and they had the same ability the NSA had. And other people like Malware Jake actually do believe, even though there's no specific evidence, it does look like they actually got this code from the NSA, Tailored Access Operations, mainly because a lot of the code is very, very, very similar. So I guess kind of the question to the group as a whole is, you have nation state level attackers. Like, once again, should a CISO get wrapped around the axle about what a nation state attacker can do? And then the other thing is, I know that some of you are actually digging around the shadow brokers stuff, and then also Vault from the CIA. Was there anything in there that really surprised you when you were looking at the capabilities? So go ahead.
I got two things. One, did anyone else microphone cut out when John went to say the 3-letter agency earlier?
Yeah, it does.
Totally did.
So the timing was just there.
Okay, I just want to make sure it wasn't me. And two, one of the things that we never talk about is how, like, in South America, thousands of years ago, pyramids propped up, and then Egypt, pyramids, and then other places, pyramids. And then we all said aliens. And I don't see why we're not doing the same thing here, where if they have this technology and they have this technology, and then why isn't it aliens giving it to both? But go ahead with whatever you all wanted to talk about.
I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. So
I mean, I suppose there's also a chance that that the Chinese developed it and the NSA took it from the Chinese and then started using it and it got leaked. I mean, who knows, right? But for your question, should a CISO get wrapped around the axle of what a nation state attacker can do? I mean, by and large, I think attribution doesn't matter for the vast majority of security programs until they reach a maturity level where they're, and I'm going to use a word, I don't have a drink, right? But until they get to a point where they can actually properly deal with threat intelligence. What I mean by threat intelligence isn't getting a list of stuff and alerting on that list of stuff. But until you reach a maturity level where you're able to detect and alert on a sequence of events that a specific attacker would do, yeah, no, it doesn't matter. Change your password policy and put 2-factor on like that. So for most folks, it doesn't. Most organizations, it just doesn't matter, in my opinion.
Ralph?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter where it came from, right? But to the point of where the Chinese got this code from, maybe they bought it from the same person, right? I mean, I don't know. This could be a up-chain code development here.
Some guy in Thailand that sells.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I mean, if we're throwing conspiracy theories out like aliens, I mean, why not? But it doesn't make too bad a sense either.
And to make one more comment on the attribution and threat intelligence thing, like, I'm not saying it's worthless, because I definitely have friends and that would probably hear me say that and go like, no, that's not true at all. I mean, I think that when you get to a certain point in your maturity level of your information security program, and you actually have someone who you're going to hire that is going to be a threat intelligence type person, and that's their full-time job. And I remember seeing things in my past gig that impressed the shit out of me. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that. No, but I just I don't think that attribution really matters for most folks.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, unless it's the government, right?
Well, that's different, right? Because
Yeah.
it does matter for them. I mean, and I would say, large government contractors, absolutely it matters. Huge financial organizations, yeah, absolutely it matters. Because if you could, if you know what certain groups are going to do, and you can build your detection and your prevention around those types of things, and you know that certain types of groups are going to target you, it does give you a better chance of winning. But I mean, that's a level of that's a level of maturity that takes a lot of money and a lot of time, right? And a lot of people.
Sure.
I wonder if we ever get to the point where, let's say, war is declared due to a cyber incident, and they're doing the here's why we're going to war, and they just start listing off all the things that they can attribute. And it's like this 472-page document of, and then 14 years ago, they also broke into this. And then they also had this. And it's just, they're building this case for, it's just a massive case. And I always feel like if I was a blue teamer or a defender listening to this or even watching the news, you were just there's so much. There's just so much.
But I think to that poor blue teamer that's kind of overwhelmed, a lot of the stuff that was released in Shadow Brokers was already patched. There was literally a huge treasure trove of exploits for different routers and edge devices and Windows, of course. And a lot of those exploits, even though they weren't public, patches already existed. And it kind of goes back to, if you're focusing on the, oh my God, it's the NSA's level attack tools, you're missing the broader picture. The broader picture is keep your crap patched. Now, there were absolutely some that were released, especially in the area of privilege escalation and modification of event logs and things of that nature. But keep focusing on those fundamentals, right? I mean, and that's kind of the goal of the class that I'm teaching, the Intro to Security class, is basically, here's the 11 things. Do these 11 things if it's triage, and you're going to stop a large number of different attackers coming into your organization.
Yeah, so, as someone who used to do forensics, it was terrifying when I found out, and still terrifying, that, event logs could be modified in this way. Because the story was in the past, no, this isn't possible. And then we find out, well, yeah, it is, right? And so the game kind of, changed a little bit. But, I think that, doing the things like that you learn in your class, right? And even though 0 days are sexy and people, CISOs maybe worry about them, right? You have to assume that there's always going to be a 0 day and a way for an attacker to get in. And you should just assume that your network is compromised and start there, right? Just assume that your internal network is hostile and that you need to figure out where the bad stuff is. And I think that's the approach that I would recommend taking.
So you can go back to that. Our team is 99% effective.
Oh, Jason, that's got to be a shirt.
That's a shirt.
That's got to be a shirt.
99% effective.
Everybody would look at that shirt and be like, "That's good enough for me."
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I'd bet on it, right?
Right. Have one of those meme guys that I don't know. We need to make that a shirt. like a guy in a suit pointing at the camera, our team is 99% effective, and don't be that CISO, right? So
yeah, if somebody comes in, is you know what, I can clean up your IT security. I'll be 99% effective. They'd be like, okay, yeah. I mean, that's great numbers, dude. I mean, but
it is. But it's still funny, right? As a red teamer, the way that we look at that, I remember one of my favorite,
you're telling me there's a chance. That's
telling me there's a chance, right? Because that's all we need, right? We just need a chance. I remember one of my favorite, all-time flame wars was between Dave Attell and Lance Spitzer on episode 150 or something of Security Weekly. And Dave Attell was ripping on user awareness training, right? And he was ripping on it because user awareness training is not 100% effective. And Lance is there, right? Lance, the user awareness training guy, is on air. And Dave Attell is just ripping on him. And Dave Attell finally starts hounding Lance Spitzer And he's like, how much does user awareness training cost through SANS? How much does it cost? How much does it cost? And Lance goes, it's less than a Canvas license, and it's a hell of a lot more effective. And it was like, boom, mic drop. But the point is of that entire story is there's no security control that you can put in place that's going to be 100% effective. Not one. Endpoint, firewall, and you're going to expect, and when you expect all of these things to fail, and you start having that overlapping field of visibility, all of a sudden it gets really damn hard for an offensive person. If you're just running like Cylance, Carbon Black, whatever tool you're running on the endpoint, you can bypass that. Right? Yeah. I mean, that's what we do. But if they're running that and they're not running network level detection, they've got good rules in Active Directory, maybe they're running honey tokens, user and entity behavioral analytics, that starts to suck like really bad to try to break into those environments and turning on firewalls.
They're escrowing all of their admin passwords in something like a vault like Psychotic or something, and their one-time checkouts. Oh, good Lord. Yeah. But I mean, I can see where people, would, say bad things about user awareness training. Like it's not 100% effective. I get that. And even we've made mistakes as an industry, right? We still make mistakes. Nothing's perfect. But, I think that telling people not to click on links from strangers isn't necessarily the best advice. Like, I think, you should definitely be wary of any unsolicited email, but you also have to realize that unsolicited email might come from someone too, right? So if it's completely unsolicited, maybe that's the better advice, right? Because
don't click on any links in emails.
But you can't break the internet either, right? There's other strategy. We've learned as an industry, but
I've looked at places where I just keep forwarding emails. Is this phishing? It looks suspicious, and they're like, "No, it's not phishing. I checked this," and they're just every time, especially if it's something you just don't want to deal with.
Take my approach and just not read email. Like, all right, no, I'm kidding.
That explains a lot. That explains a lot.
I do got to talk about the strange link from a strange person. Then I'm done for today. Is that my daughter's friend in Discord while playing Roblox got a link from a stranger who was like, "Do you want this special thing inside the game?" And the person's like, "Heck yeah!" So they clicked on it, and it stole his account. Like, it locked him out of his account. Like, all the things happened after that. And my daughter, who's 15, went into incident response mode. She went into mitigation. She was trying to triage and figure all this stuff out. But they were able to get the account back. But both of them learned a lot about password policy. They learned a lot about incident response. They learned a lot about security awareness, all in the last 48 hours. And then she just made a video on here's what happened. She gives a breakdown of the timeline of who the person was, what the link looked like, and all these things. And she made a video of it and put it on her YouTube channel for anyone else that might.
Yeah. Your daughter sounds like a straight shooter with middle management at BHIS written all over her.
I was gonna say, hey John, you're paying attention, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. God.
I wonder where she learned all those marketing skills, though.
So proud.
Good for the community too. Good.
I like how the end was. She did a video and put it on YouTube. That's smart, clever girl. Clever. So, all right. So let's wrap it up. Unless you guys have anything else to say.
Well, good here.
All right, Ryan, take us out, sir.
There's a little reverb.
A little.